welcome to another episode of the Murder News podcast. These weekly episodes double as weekly meetings for our very own true crime cult.
But don't worry, you've landed in the cult with all the baby goes and none of the brainwashing. We just like to imagine a secret hideaway from the world where we can camp out with all of our spooky friends, making flower crowns, roasting marshmallows, and sharing our best scary stories about the subject that unites us all, murder.
I'm Angelina, and today I'm hanging out with my creepy comrade, Aurora. How are things on your end?
Oh, surviving.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's the ongoing theme. I was just thinking like all of the news I have to possibly share exists within my apartment because apparently I'm still not going much of anywhere. But last week I know I was a little worried about recording because I mentioned to you that someone upstairs was stomping with boots like all morning, and then it stopped in time, luckily. But what I found was that was my neighbors moving out. And so then I had some new neighbors moving in who, unfortunately, I've peeped through the window as they were moving. At first, I was like, oh, no, it's a white man with dreadlocks. And then I was like, no, wait, there's two of them. It's two white men with dreadlocks living upstairs now. And to boot, during the move-in, move-out, whatever thing, something happened up there that caused a flood that came down through my ceiling into my closet and made big, weird water bags in the paint, and now everything needs to be redone in there.
You're kidding.
So excited.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We're going to see you in an episode of that show, Worst Neighbors.
Yeah. I don't know who will be worse, these guys that already exist or me after I do the murder. Yeah. So
I'll still love you.
Oh, thanks.
We like to think of all of you as honorary monsters just because you tune into our show week after week. But if you'd like to make things more official, you can join the MMN commune on Patreon. Perks include your own flashy title like Deacon of Goats, a shout out on the show, and of course, exclusive access to our regular patron-only content. We don't know what that's going to be this month. So if you have any suggestions for like weird April, like phenomena or big murders or like anything sort of unusual.
The ultimate April Fool. Something.
Ooh, April Fool's jokes. That's got gone wrong. That's a good idea.
Oh, yeah. We just thought of the plan right here and now.
Okay. That might just be our topic, y'all. So tune in for that before the end of the month for sure. We love all of our patrons.
Now, before we dig into today's story, let's take a look at some true crime headlines from this week.
On March 27th, Florida mom Cassie Carley met her ex Marcus Spinavelo to drop off her 4-year-old daughter for some time with her dad. The next day, she was reported missing. The Major Crimes Unit of Santa Rosa County traveled over 1,500 miles by car in search of Cassie or any evidence relating to her disappearance. Last Saturday, Spinavelo was arrested in Lebanon, Tennessee by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Sheriff Bob Johnson announced that evening that Carley's body was found in a shallow grave in an Alabama barn. Spinavelo is being held on charges for tampering with evidence, giving false information concerning a missing person investigation, and destruction of evidence after he admitted to having taken Carley's phone and, quote, basically got rid of it. Sheriff Johnson says any potential additional charges are pending the results of Cassie's autopsy.
During the 1980s, an unknown serial killer terrorized women working as night clerks at motels along Interstate 65. Responsible for at least 3 murders and 1 sexual assault, the murderer evaded authorities for over 3 decades. Now, investigators have finally been able to identify the perpetrator using genetic genealogy. Harry Edward Greenwell, who served at least 2 prison sentences for violent crimes in his lifetime, passed away in 2013 at the age of 68. Law enforcement officials note that there is a distinct possibility that Greenwell was responsible for additional murders, rapes, and robberies in the Midwest, and they are still being actively investigated.
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.
Are you looking for a new adventure? Did you ever want to visit the city where all your nightmares reside? Well, you're in luck. Join us, your tour guides, Christine and Jen, to visit Nopeville, where you will be personally escorted on an all-inclusive trip through the city and see all possibilities of terror and fright.
You'll see all sorts of things on your tours, including, but definitely not limited to, the paranormal, true crime, the supernatural, and more. If you're into all that and enjoy a little dark humor, book your tour today and Nope right along with us. Check us out on our website at nopevillepodcast.com to see where you can listen to Nopeville today.
And we're back.
Now, before we get into our story, we just want to say that while our tone is light in the intro, we do take the topics we're discussing very seriously. We are best buds and we love chatting together every week and turning it into a podcast. We want to share that passion with you and to create a vibe where all of you feel like our best buds too. We joke about us friends forming a cult or commune, but that's not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, which we do occasionally talk about in our weekly stories. We feel it's important to open up and talk about even the darkest aspects of humanity and the downright scary things that come up in the news. But we want to make it clear that our intention is never to sensationalize, and we always try to deliver these stories with respect to all parties involved or affected by the crimes we discuss.
We always post our sources in the episode description, so you can do some digging on your own if a story we present piques your interest. But you should know that if you ever feel we get it wrong, either in our tone or in the details of the case, we want to hear about it. We are more than happy to make a correction or give an update on a case we've discussed in previous episodes. So feel free to reach out to us at murdermurdernews@gmail.com. Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include dismemberment, abuse of a corpse, sexual assault, and mention of Satanism. If any of these subjects are particularly sensitive for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
We won't start this week's story with its corresponding point in true crime history because what happened this week in true crime history in Florence, Italy is just one thumbtack in the midst of a tangled mess of red string on a detective's bulletin board. It's a lot to unpack. Lucky for you, we've broken it down into digestible chunks to make for easier listening. A full list of sources for today's story will be in the show notes for this episode. Included are a few podcasts, notably Rotten Mango, the host of which seems to me to be the inspiration for the podcaster on Dexter New Blood. Let me know if you agree. Also, a podcast called Death Metal Dicks, which I'm amused exists. It's probably not the most PC of podcasts, but if you're into death metal and crime, they've got your niche. There's an episode of Criminal Minds Beyond Borders inspired by the case we're talking about today. I accidentally watched 35 minutes of the wrong episode before I realized the story wasn't about to take a drastic turn. So in the end, I saw 2 episodes of the show, and I can attest it is god-awful, so maybe don't bother. I want to give a special thanks to Redditor Riso Cantonese, who painstakingly translated and reviewed over a dozen Italian news articles and did a multi-part write-up on this case on Reddit, providing a lot of helpful background info. Mm-hmm. I read a spectacular book about the case called The Monster of Florence, A True Story, written by Douglas Preston and Mario Spezi. I listened to the audiobook, which had theme music and an array of Italian accents. This was the most thoroughly entertaining nonfiction book I've read in a long while, and I would highly recommend it. In the book, Preston describes the case as the longest and most expensive criminal investigation in Italian history. The case is one of criminology's most baffling mysteries, with an investigation spanning more than 4 decades. You've probably never heard of it, but you'll be shocked that you haven't. Italy's Jack the Ripper parallels America's Zodiac Killer, which we'll come back to. This case spawned many Lover's Lane urban legends that carried on for years to come. Author Thomas Harris took inspiration from the case while writing Hannibal. The movie based on the book had a side plot that was heavily focused on the Monster of Florence, which was cut for time, but those deleted scenes still exist in the special features of the DVD.
All right, so let's jump in. June 6th, 1981 was a moonless Saturday night. 21-year-old Carmela Di Nuccio invited her new boyfriend to have dinner with her and her parents at their home in Scandici. She had been dating 30-year-old Giovanni Foggi for just a few months, but they were already talking about marriage. Most likely, they were eager to rush into things because of the stifling Italian culture surrounding dating and marriage at the time. Most people lived with their parents until their late 20s or early 30s, until they married and moved in with their new spouse. Some even remained at home after they had family of their own, as they were expected to stay and take care of their parents. Carmela worked for the Gucci fashion house as a leather worker, her career already well underway. Giovanni was more into trades and had already established his path with a local electric utility company. Even still, it must have been hard to feel like a real adult with their parents still hovering over them at home. After a nice dinner, Carmela told her parents that she and Giovanni were going to go grab some ice cream, but promised to be back in an hour and a half max. Instead, they headed out for the hills of Rovetta, and Giovanni parked his copper Fiat on a quiet street overlooking a vineyard. This little nook was known to young folks local to the area as Lover's Lane. Each and every community in the area, big or small, had a Lover's Lane. Due to the aforementioned stifling culture, having sex in cars was basically a national pastime. The young couple never came home that night, and their parents' worst fears were confirmed the next morning when their bodies were discovered.
Around 9 a.m., Vittorio Schifone was taking a walk with his young son when he came across a parked car with the door open. Behind a spiderweb of glass, a man was slumped against the driver's seat with a bullet wound in his head. Across the street, a woman's lifeless body lay in the tall grass. Lead investigator on the scene, Ruggero Perugini, says an image of the woman's corpse with her pearl necklace caught between her parted lips will remain forever burned into his brain. Police questioned neighboring residents, but only one heard any commotion from the previous night. A farmer whose property bordered on the vineyard recalled hearing John Lennon's Imagine blaring until it abruptly stopped mid-song. He did not remember hearing any gunshots. After initially assuming that an animal had gotten to Carmela's body, investigators soon realized that the killer had, quote, cut out her vagina and taken it with him. The assailant worked with precision, and by the cuts it was clear he had used a specialized knife with a notch in the blade, possibly a scuba knife. The killer had stabbed Giovanni twice before leaving the scene. The first suspect was Carmela's jealous ex-boyfriend who had been stalking her, but he had an airtight alibi for the night she was killed.
Mario Spezi, a journalist working for Florence's newspaper La Nazione, recalled reporting on an eerily similar crime 7 years earlier. Teenage sweethearts killed at a lover's lane near Borgo San Lorenzo. 19-year-old bartender Pasquale Gentilcore dropped his little sister Maria Cristina at a popular disco called Teen Club on the evening of Saturday, September 15th, 1974. He promised he would be back to pick her up around midnight, and then he drove to the house where his girlfriend, 18-year-old Stefania Pettini, lived with her parents. He had been dating Stefania, who worked as an accountant, for 2 years. The couple were excited to soon share the news of their recent engagement with friends and family. They parked Pasquale's dad's blue Fiat in a secluded spot near Teen Club and had a tearful fight, immediately followed by makeup sex. Their killer watched the whole thing and waited for them to get dressed before striking. Another couple driving by the spot at 11:45 p.m. that night reported hearing gunshots. The killer approached the car and shot Pasquale 5 times, killing him. Stefania had 3 bullet wounds. None of them were fatal. Her attacker dragged her out of the car and stripped her naked. Next, he stabbed her a total of 96 times. 3 stab wounds to her chest were fatal, but most of the stab wounds were precise and shallow slices. Almost like he was romancing his victim with a knife, getting some kind of twisted pleasure out of his delicate work. He ripped a grapevine from the vineyard and raped Stefania with it, leaving it inside of her when he left. Stefania's purse had been dumped upside down, its contents scattered around the crime scene. The purse itself was absent, but an anonymous call later led investigators to find the bag in a cornfield about 300 meters away. Friends would later recall Stefania worrying about a creep who'd been following her. Other lovers who frequented the site told police that it was a hotspot for voyeurs, and several couples reported seeing a couple of creeps in particular hanging around looking shady. One such creep was Guido Giovanni. Police questioned and then released him. Bruno Macali, a healer who had recently visited Pasquale, was also investigated and cleared. A man named Giuseppe Franchini confessed to the murder, but he was found to be a pathological liar who made up stories for attention.
Mario Spezi outlined several similarities between this 1974 cold case and the murders that had just taken place, and speculated that the two were connected by a serial killer. He dubbed the killer Il Mostro, the Monster of Florence. Police took another look at the evidence collected and noted that the same notched bullet casings were found at both crime scenes. Winchester H-series bullets from a .22 Beretta pistol. The notch likely caused by a defective firing pin, meaning the same gun was certainly used in both murders. They concurred with Spezi. Investigators looked into allegations of voyeurism and uncovered a whole network of peeping creeps. When lovers parked their cars in secluded areas to have sex, creepos would park themselves in an even more secluded area overlooking the lover's lane. They'd set up with binoculars or sometimes even cameras and spy on frisky couples while they got busy. Some of the crew served as guides to make these creeps aware of the best spots for peeping. The most sought-after spots were bought and sold among the perverts. The icing on this layer cake was the secondary gang who creeped the creepers. Basically, once folks realized there was a whole network of voyeurs at work, some saw an opportunity for some glorious blackmail. Taking photos of the pervs and making note of any identifying details, they would soon receive calls or letters threatening to expose them if they didn't pay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Layers on layers on layers.
Right.
Enzo Spalletti, a 36-year-old ambulance driver and father of three, was quite renowned for his voyeurism. Several witnesses alleged to have seen his car parked near the scene of Carmela and Giovanni's murders. His wife recalled that he came home after 2 a.m., telling her he had come across two dead guys in the road on his way home. He described details of Carmela's mutilated body that hadn't yet been released to the public. Questioned by police, he claimed he read about it in the paper. Spalletti was arrested and jailed for perjury. The police were sure they had their so-called maniac and essentially stopped investigating, planning to find enough evidence to put Enzo away for life. Enzo felt that he was the victim of a police cover-up saying, quote, "You guys know I'm innocent, but you're keeping me in jail because you're protecting someone else." Seeming to back up that theory, Enzo's wife and brother both claimed to have received phone calls while he was in jail saying, "Tell him to be quiet and calm. He'll soon be exonerated. He'll get out of jail, but serves him right, that idiot. What was he thinking when he said he read it in the paper when the paper hadn't been out yet?" End quote. Sure enough, Enzo Spalletti was exonerated when the monster struck again that October while he was in custody. Enzo was released, but the police couldn't let go of him as a suspect. He would be questioned in each consecutive murder.
24-year-old Susanna Cambi had been seeing 26-year-old Stefano Baldi for 7 years. The two were engaged and planned to wed in the spring of 1982. After the couple had dinner at his home on October 23, 1981, Stefano planned to give Susanna a ride to her aunt's house. They left his place around 11 p.m. in his black Volkswagen Golf. En route to Florence, where Susanna's aunt lived, the couple were driving through Calanzano when they were compelled to pull over. The area is home to some pretty breathtaking scenery, but this was a very dark night. More taken by each other, the pair spotted a secluded area and started making out. This crime scene was a little less organized than the other two. Susanna had been shot first, and she was shot a total of 5 times. Stefano had 4 bullet wounds. Stefano's body was in a ditch near the car. So either he tried to escape and was killed as he ran from the car, or he was dragged there by the killer. Susanna was dragged 30 feet from the car and propped up in a seated position. Her shirt was pulled up to expose her breasts, and there was a deep gash across her left breast. Her pubic area had also been mutilated, the monster again collecting his trophy. This time, he cut deeper and took a bigger piece of Susanna's flesh away with him. The cuts on her body were nowhere near as precise as Carmela's, which falls in line with the idea that Stefano and Susanna had tried to run away, perhaps causing their attacker to panic. Once again, the killer stabbed Stefano on his way out of there. Susanna's purse seemed to have been rummaged through, but the contents weren't dumped onto the ground. A small red granite pyramid was found near the car, which police thought might have been used to break its window. So it was bagged as evidence. We'll come back to this later. Friends say Susanna talked about being followed by a stalker, and many tips were called in by people who said they saw a shady-looking man creeping around near the crime scene. An artist drew up the first sketch of the suspect, though it may have been an unrelated voyeur.
Now, this story is just blowing up. This is definitely the work of a serial killer, and police have been wrong when they thought they had their guy. All of Florence and its surrounding areas erupt into hysteria. Serial killers were thought of as an American thing, and even brutal crimes with fewer victims were uncommon in these parts of Europe. This whole idea was completely foreign in Florence, and Florentines decided maybe they should rethink their ideas surrounding sex and romantic relationships. Maybe parents should loosen up and let their kids have some privacy at home with their partners. The government started a campaign to discourage young people from meeting up in secluded spots, and signs were put up around every scenic lookout with a big, watchful eye on them. They were careful not to mention a killer on the signs so as to not scare off daytime tourists, but instead carried a more vague message of vigilance. Mario Spezi took the lead on reporting about his monster, doing some of the most thorough investigative journalism ever. He profiled criminologists, psychologists, and sociologists. He interviewed psychics, some of whom were hired by the police to help with the case. He unpacked a number of theories connecting the dots. He came to be known as the monstrologer. That's a good name.
Yeah.
The police, too, had a team dedicated to the monster case. They were called SAM for Squadra Anti-Mostra, the Anti-Monster Squad. One of the reasons why I've always been attracted to true crime is that I spend a lot of time processing the worst thing that can happen and kind of planning my escape route if I were to be abducted or find myself on a scary Tinder date. But sometimes I get true crime overload, which leads me to setting up booby traps around my apartment like I'm Kevin McAllister, self-medicating with wine, and struggling with falling asleep.
I'm so glad that we talk about therapy so much in this community, and I've learned so much about cognitive behavior therapy from the work I've done and how I can use those tools to calm down when my mind is racing or imagining there could be a serial killer hiding in my closet. We've been using this great app, Nuna, that uses CBT methods in this cool chat function, which helps me get a hold of my thoughts and feel like a friend is helping talk me back to a more reasonable state of mind.
You can try Nuna right now to help with your mental well-being and get 25% off when you use our link to sign up. Just go to landing.nuna.ai/MMN or just click on the link in our show notes for your 25% discount.
Let Nuna help convince you that the noise you heard outside your door is probably just your cat up to their usual hijinks. June 19th, 1982, another moonless Saturday night. 19-year-old Antonella Migliorini and 22-year-old Paolo Maniardi had dinner with his mother before heading out for the evening. The couple met some friends downtown. If they were honest, they just couldn't wait to get some alone time. Around 10:30 p.m., they left their friends, who affectionately referred to the duo as Vinaville, like the popular brand of superglue. The two were inseparable. Taking off in Paolo's white Fiat, they parked at Via Virginio Nuova in Bacciano, a popular hookup spot. It wasn't so secluded that day, as the city of Serbia had a holiday celebrating their patron saint. People were partying in the streets just a few kilometers down the road. Thinking they would take what little privacy they could get, Antonella and Paolo hopped in the back seat to have sex. Shot as they were getting dressed, Antonella was incapacitated, but Paolo was able to climb back into the front seat and try to escape. The car rolled into a ditch, and before he knew it, Paolo's tires were spinning in the mud. The car's headlights illuminated the killer, and the two stared ahead in horror as he slowly approached. The monster shot out both headlights, then shot Paolo again. He slipped into the driver's seat, shoving Paolo into the back seat, and tried to drive the vehicle to a more secluded spot where he could carry out his bizarre ritual and collect his trophy. Unable to get the car out of the ditch, the assailant fled. Moments later, two more couples in cars pulled into the spot and, upon discovering that Paolo was still breathing, called for an ambulance. Paolo never regained consciousness, but authorities instructed journalists to pretend that he did, advising them to print that a surviving victim was able to give some crucial information that will aid in solving the case. This was done in hopes that the monster would freak out and slip up. Paolo's father claimed to have received an anonymous phone call from a man with a Tuscan accent asking about his son's last words. However, this didn't seem to affect the investigation in any way. At the scene of the crime, a package of Norzitam was found, which is a supplement meant to improve cognitive function. The keys were found tossed in the grass about 20 meters from the car. The details of this particular murder were just begging to be made into a film, specifically one of the giallo genre, a gory niche of Italian crime thrillers led by famed director Dario Argento. Giallo translates to yellow, the color of the covers of popular crime novels at the time. In 1986, a giallo film came out about the case called Assassino e ancora tra noi. The Killer is Still Among Us, directed by Camillo Tetti. I would absolutely recommend this film to fans of the genre, and it covers several important points in the real case, though it does take some creative liberty in creating the film's protagonist, a young woman so fascinated by the case that she sees the killer in everyone, including her own boyfriend, and ultimately becomes a target herself. This woman did not exist in real life, but does seem to be loosely based in some ways on Mario Spezi.
As we mentioned, Italians were up in arms over the sensational case, and everybody had a theory. Hundreds of tips were called in, and if a tip seemed to be at all plausible, police would have to investigate it. Folks reported their hot-tempered ex-husbands, their introverted neighbors, the guy that bags their groceries, all as possible suspects. Investigators' hands were tied as they interviewed suspects and witnesses alike. Much like Jack the Ripper, media-driven speculation suggested that the Monster of Florence knew his way around a knife so well that he must have been a doctor or perhaps a butcher. The most renowned gynecologist in Florence's reputation took a massive hit when he was accused. His career was never the same. Similarly, pharmacist Francesco Calamadre's life took a turn for the worse when his ex-wife accused him of being the monster. Local gossip exacerbated the situation when a completely fabricated story went around suggesting that Francesco's wife found women's body parts in their refrigerator. He endured nearly 2 decades of scrutiny before he was finally cleared, which no amount of compensation could make up for. While looking at butchers, a pizza maker came under suspicion too. After being accused by members of his own community and heavily interrogated by police, the pizza man was found to have slit his own throat, completing suicide. Investigators confirmed he had no connection whatsoever to the monster, but the stress of the interrogation got to him. In 1982, police received an anonymous letter containing a newspaper clipping from 1968. Quote, "Take another look at this case," said the note, which was signed "A Friendly Citizen." That same day, Vincenzo Tricomi, the examining magistrate, discovered 5 bullets and 5 shell casings that were improperly stored in a folder with the court's case files. Police were unable to reconstruct the chain of custody of those pieces of evidence and did not request a scientific comparison to the evidence found on the more recent crime scenes. Still, the presence of those bullets and shell casings indicated to police that the crimes were all related.
On August 21st, 1968, 32-year-old Barbara Locci went to a movie with her lover, 29-year-old Antonio Lobianco. After the movie, around 10 p.m., Antonio parked his white Alfa Romeo near the cemetery in Signa so the two could have sex. While they were at it, They were each shot 4 times from a distance by an unseen assailant using a Beretta 22 long rifle. What the killer may not have noticed was that Barbara's 6-year-old son, Natalino, had been sleeping in the back seat. Antonio and Barbara had not been a couple, and both were married to other people. Barbara, nicknamed Queen Bee and known in the community for her sexual prowess and high body count, would often go out on dates with Natalino in tow. To Natalino, his mother's many dates were all known as Uncle. After the double murder, Natalino wandered off and made his way to the doorstep of his parents' landlord. "Open the door," he says. "I'm sleepy and my daddy is sick at home. You need to take me home because mommy and uncle are dead in the car." The landlord asked what happened, and the little boy replied, "It was dark, all the plants were moving, there was nobody. I was very scared. I said some prayers to get some courage. I started to sing La Tramontana. Mommy is dead, uncle is dead, daddy is sick at home." Around 3 a.m., Natalino led the police back to the car, still parked in the cemetery, with its lights still on.
The first suspect in the Loci Lobianco murder was Barbara's husband, Stefano Mele. Mele was a construction worker of Sardinian descent, described by those who knew him as semi-literate and excessively meek. But there was no motive. Stefano knew of Barbara's affairs, but didn't seem to mind. Sometimes Barbara would bring a date home to sleep over, and in the morning, Stefano would bring them coffee in bed. Stefano was interrogated for 12 long hours before he finally confessed. He quickly retracted his confession and pointed to one of Barbara's lovers, Salvatore Vinci. Or wait, maybe Salvatore's brother, Francesco, another one of Barbara's lovers. Then Stefano says he and Francesco worked together. Or no, wait, it was another one of Barbara's lovers, Carmelo Cutrano. Everyone Stefano fingered had alibis. His story was confused and disconnected. He seemed to know specific details of the murder, but was also unaware of other key details. Investigators brought him along to the scene of the crime and asked him to reenact it. Investigators noticed that he didn't know from which window the two were shot, and he didn't even know how to hold a gun. The gun itself, Stefano claimed to have thrown into a stream or given it to one of his supposed accomplices. Little Natalino was interrogated for a staggering 15 hours and allegedly threatened with lighter burns if he didn't speak up. Understandably, Natalino's story had changed several times. He claimed to have walked down the road all alone to get help and said he hadn't seen anything. Then he said he hopped out of the car to find his father, who carried him down the road before leaving him on the doorstep of the landlord's house and telling him not to say anything. Or wait, not his father, one of his uncles. The fact that the statement had been obviously coerced didn't come to light until 50 years later when he admitted he was threatened and interrogated mercilessly. In March of 1970, Stefano Mele was found guilty but mentally incompetent, which earned him the relatively light sentence of 14 years in prison.
Authorities considered this an open and shut case, but that concept crumbled in the summer of 1982 when investigators connected the Loci Lobianco murder to the recent murders of 8 people by the Monster of Florence. The monster had already struck on 4 separate occasions during the 14 years that Mele was in prison. So how could Stefano be their guy? Mario Spezi visited Stefano Mele in prison and questioned him. Mele spoke of the murder weapon almost to himself, saying, quote, "Police must find the gun or else they will never stop killing." This is what eventually sparked the idea that the Monster of Florence was more than one person, and that more than one person was present for the murder of Mele's wife. I read this statement a little differently, aware of the singular they. Nonetheless, investigators' minds were open to the possibility that they were on the lookout for more than one culprit. Here's where things get a little xenophobic. Investigators seem to assume these murders were carried out by an immigrant or immigrants, and figured, if not Stefano Mele, maybe the monster was one of the several Sardinian acquaintances he had implicated at the time of his arrest. This leg of the investigation came to be known as the Sardinian Trail. They questioned Mele again, who again accused Francesco Vinci, who was arrested in August of 1982. He was officially booked on charges of domestic battery and theft, but they really thought he was the monster and just wanted to find any excuse they could to put him behind bars. Curiously, Francesco was also found to be in possession of a pack of Norzitam supplements. Francesco Vinci was in custody for over a year and only released sometime after the next murders took place.
In September of 1983, 2 German students of fine art took a short trip to Italy to celebrate a scholarship one of them had just received. Horst Wilhelm Meyer and Jens Uwe Rusch, both 24, parked their Volkswagen van in Scandici and were relaxing in the back when a gunshot flew through the right side window and into Meyer's abdomen, killing him instantly. Jens tries to hide as the killer fires another shot at Horst, but he is shot twice in the crossfire. Then the monster opened the door to the van and shot Jens Rusch twice at close range. As he enters the van, the killer is disappointed to learn both victims were men. He'd been fooled by Jens' long hair. The crime scene was not roped off, and nosy neighbors poked around as investigators got to work, possibly stepping on or otherwise tampering with important bits of evidence. Crime scene photos showed more than 15 people standing around the van with their hands in their pockets. A gay porn magazine was found about 30 feet away from the van, which led investigators to assume the 2 were a gay couple, but that detail can't be confirmed. Out of the 7 bullet casings, only 4 were found, but they did match the bullets found at the other crime scenes, so it was certain that this was the work of the Monster of Florence, who they rightfully must admit was not Francesco Vinci. And so on to the next Sardinian.
The next under suspicion were Giovanni Mele and Piero Mucciarini, Stefano Mele's brother and brother-in-law, respectively. But while those 2 were in custody, the monster struck again. 18-year-old Pia Rontini came home from her bartending shift around 8 p.m. on July 29, 1984. She was kind of bummed out and didn't feel much like going out, but her mother encouraged her to enjoy her free time more. Pia called her boyfriend, 21-year-old Claudio Stefanacci. These 2 had been dating forever and were each other's first loves. As soon as he hung up the phone, Claudio rushed over to pick up his girlfriend in his blue Fiat. They pulled off the road onto a known lover's lane in Vicchio. This young couple knows all about the Monster of Florence, but they're not afraid anymore, since they heard he was caught and rotting in prison. The 2 were undressing in the back seat when Claudio was shot 4 times through the right side of the rear window. Claudio collapses onto Pia, and Pia can't get up. As she tries to wriggle out from under him, the killer fires a bullet directly into her skull. Opening the car door, the killer stabbed Claudio 5 times and then stabbed Pia twice in the neck. He dragged her out of the car and into the grass, where he performed his usual mutilations, and then some. He sliced off Pia's entire pubic region as well as her left breast. He ripped off her necklace, which bore a crucifix-shaped pendant, and took that with him as well. This murder exonerated Piero Mucciarini and Giovanni Mele. Mario Spezi didn't hold back in his reporting on the Monster of Florence case, and according to Douglas Preston, exposed a miasma of incompetence among police and prosecutors, who weren't loving being mocked.
On September 6, 1985, 2 campers pitched a small tent next to their car in a wooded area of Scopetti. 36-year-old Nadine Mario was the owner of a shoe store and a recently divorced mother of 2. Her boyfriend, 25-year-old Jean-Michel Kravachvelli, was a musician who was originally from Georgia. And the 2 were on a camping road trip through Italy, but they both lived in France. They had never heard of the Monster of Florence until he creeped up to their tent sometime that weekend. The exact date is pretty uncertain. Slicing through its outer layer, the killer was frustrated to find the tent had 2 layers, and he just started shooting. 1 bullet went through a pillow, 4 hit Nadine, killing her. Jean-Michel managed to escape and ran away with the monster shooting after him. He was shot once in the elbow, immobilizing him. The monster approached and stabbed him 12 times, slit his throat, and nearly decapitated him. Then he went back to the tent to stab Nadine, steal her vaginal area and left breast. Differing from the previous cases, the killer attempted to hide the bodies, curling Nadine up in a fetal position and zipping her into the tent, and hiding Jean-Michel's body among some garbage and the bushes nearby. Their bodies were found by mushroom foragers in the afternoon of September 9th. On September 10th, Florentine public prosecutor Silvia Della Monica received a strange packet in the mail. The package was decorated with cutout newspaper letters, which had notably misspelled one of the words in the address, Republica. This supported the investigation's idea that the killer may be semi-literate or that he was an immigrant, since some countries nearby, including Sardinia, typically spelled the word Republica with only one B. Inside the pocket, Della Monica found a 1-inch strip of flesh from Nadine Muriot's left breast.
Now that 2 more Sardinian suspects have been eliminated and released from their wrongful imprisonment, examining magistrate Mario Rotella, the #1 believer in the Sardinian trail, is forced to turn his attention towards the only remaining suspect on his list, Salvatore Vinci, Francesco's brother. Salvatore had a long criminal history, but off the record, everyone who knew him believed him to have killed his wife in 1960, though her death had been ruled a suicide. While they had their eye on Salvatore, investigators had found a blood-stained rag with gunpowder on it in his home shortly after the 1984 murders. But neither the blood nor the gunpowder on this rag could be matched to any substances collected at the scenes of the crimes of the Monster of Florence. This was mostly because evidence hadn't been properly preserved after the victims' autopsies, which made testing difficult. Salvatore Vinci was put in jail under the pretense of opening an investigation into his wife's death. Ultimately, he was acquitted and had to be released. Finally, in 1989, Mario Rotella himself put an end to the Sardinian Trail investigations, citing lack of evidence.
Ruggero Perugini, who joined the Monster Squad in 1986, became its leader in 1989. His nickname was Super Cop because he wore yellow aviators, and folks saw him as this cool American movie cop type. He studied at FBI Academy in Virginia, after all. Everything is re-examined with new eyes. The police make a registry of all the regular clients of nearby shooting ranges and of all the people who purchased Beretta 22s. They look into everyone that was admitted to an asylum between 1974 and 1981, the monster's longest period of inactivity. They pore over records, noting down the names of every single man between 30 and 60 years of age living alone in the province. They even organize undercover operations where male and female agents are staked out in lovers' lanes, pretending to be young couples. They create a phone line specifically for tips about the monster and promise a reward of 500 million lire for relevant information. This may have been the most regrettable moment of the investigation because the reward inspired everyone and their neighbor to use the tip line, grasping at straws and wasting investigators' time. Ultimately, the reward was canceled.
The investigation spins out a bit, and authorities and the media start to entertain some pretty wild theories. What if, and this might sound like a bit of a reach, but hear me out, maybe the monster is actually a satanic cult? Some have said the red granite pyramid found on the scene of the 1982 murders is probably just a doorstop, but what if it's some kind of Satan stone? And why else would anyone want to collect body parts, especially sex organs, if not to perform a satanic ritual? Investigators also assumed that the gay porn magazine found on the scene of the 1983 murders was satanic because who else would have gay porn in the woods besides Satanists? The cult's idea lined up with the supposition that the monster may be more than one person, perhaps even a group. But who could the cult's leader be? And who could have actually carried out all of the murders on the cult's behalf? What if the monster is a priest? The victim who was assaulted with a grapevine could have been a biblical message. The Bible says, quote, "I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit." Maybe the killer was after couples who had sex outside of marriage or with no intent to produce children. Maybe he saw all this action at lovers' lanes around Florence as a sin, and he felt he was doing his part to cleanse that sin. If not a priest, at least some kind of incel, someone who loathed these lovers for getting all the action he never could.
Back in 1984, a Dr. De Fazio was tasked with creating a psychological profile of the monster. He described him as exceptionally cold and confident in performing the murders and having a heightened sense of sexual morality. But in 1989, a second psychological profile done by the FBI described him as a frustrated, unmarried, possibly impotent loner who was unable to have relationships with women of his age. Even though the Monster Squad had requested the second profile, Perugini ultimately rejected it, insisting that incel types are born of American culture and Italian culture is different. Perugini said, "We're talking about the Monster of Florence here, not of Illinois." And investigators largely ignored the FBI profile. Also initially ignored was an anonymous letter sent to police shortly after the monster's final murders in 1985. Quote, "May you as soon as possible interrogate our fellow citizen Pietro Pacciani, born in Vicchio and residing in our town in Piazza del Popolo Mercatale. This person, according to many people, was in prison for 15 years for killing his own girlfriend. He knows 1,000 trades. He's a clever, cunning man, a farmer with thick soles but a sharp mind. He keeps his entire family locked up. His wife is dumb. He never lets his daughters out. They have no friends. Please intervene and interrogate this person and his daughters. He is a sharpshooter," end quote. The letter got some of the details wrong, but it was clear Pacciani was a pretty terrible dude. He was known as a drunk who frequently flew off the handle and into a rage. His quick temper earned him the nickname La Vampa, or the Flame. Back in 1951, when he was 26-year-old, Pacciani caught his 17-year-old girlfriend, Miranda Bugli, in a compromising act with another man. Flying into a violent rage, he stabbed the man to death. He raped Miranda next to his dead body, promising her to split any money he finds on the man. Pacciani was sentenced to 18 years in prison, and Miranda was sentenced to 10 years because the judge thought she might have actually plotted with him to rob the man, using sex as a distraction. And Pacciani's 1951 case file was that the man, quote, "flew into a blind rage after seeing his girlfriend expose her left breast," end quote.
After getting out of prison early for good behavior, Pacciani turned his depravity against his own family. He beat and terrorized his wife, Angelina, but the worst was reserved for his daughters, who he started sexually abusing from a young age. He would beat them, assault them with cucumbers, feed them dog food, and lock them in the house. The day the letter arrived, authorities paid Pacciani a visit at his home, but hearing his alibi for the night of the 1985 murders and learning that he had been at home with his family, they dismissed him and assumed this was just another of the hundreds of misguided anonymous tips they had received. But in 1989, when the Monster Squad cross-referenced a list of 82 men from their database of, quote, "men who had reason to stop killing couples after 1985, with a list of Tuscan men between the ages of 30 and 60 arrested in the years after the last murder. They whittled down that list to people who were out of jail for at least a week before and after each murder, and allegedly Pietro Pacciani was the only one to appear on both lists, though none of this data was ever viewed in court as it had been accidentally deleted. As adults, Pacciani's daughters pressed charges against their father, who was sentenced to 8 years in prison in 1987. He was still serving time when the Monster Squad caught up with him. Investigating Pacciani, they searched his home, finding a pair of binoculars, an article about the monster, and a scrap of paper on which Pacciani had written down a license plate number and the word couple next to it. They traced the plate down to a car of a couple who would often hang around Scopetti, the place of the 1985 murder. The couple, however, had never been harassed by anybody there.
In December of 1991, Pacciani was again released from jail for good behavior. His belongings were seized the second he stepped out. The only noteworthy thing they found on him was a porn magazine in which some women had their pubic areas and breasts circled with a pencil. In a subsequent search of his home, investigators say they noticed something sparkling in the dirt of his vegetable garden. The sparkle came from an old, corroded bullet, unfired, still in its cartridge, firmly lodged between the dirt and a cement pole. The bullet is a Winchester long rifle, .22 caliber, with an H on its bottom, the same bullets used by the monster. But since the bullets hadn't been fired, it doesn't have the defect mark that the monster's bullets have. It has, however, been inserted inside a gun, but got presumably stuck in the chamber and had been removed manually by whoever was handling the gun. Convicted in 1994, the prosecutor took Pacciani's side in his appeal, citing lack of evidence and poor police work. Pacciani was acquitted and released in 1996. A new trial for Pacciani was ordered by the Supreme Court, but he died in 1998 before it could begin. Instead, two alleged accomplices were tried, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Latti. Vanni had been a witness at Pacciani's trial, where he famously claimed that he and Pacciani were merely snack buddies. Latti had been a surprise witness, claiming to have seen Pacciani and Vanni commit the 1985 murder. With further questioning, he incriminated himself in the murders as well. Both men were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Every one of the aforementioned convictions in the monster case is heavily controversial, and many believe that the true monster has never been caught. This includes journalist Mario Spezi, who continued to report on the preposterous suggestions put forward by the prosecution in various cases tied to the Monster of Florence killings. But if none of the suspects that had been questioned, arrested, or even convicted of the murders were the true monster, then who?
Scratching their heads, investigators shook their clenched fists at the sky in unison and shouted into the universe, "God damn you, Spezi." They came for Mario Spezi. If he knew so damn much about the monster case and he seemed to delight in mocking the investigators and prosecutors on the case, maybe the logical explanation was that Spezi was the killer. They even mused that perhaps Spezi was part of or even led a satanic cult who carried out the killings. Police searched his house, wiretapped his computer, car, and telephone, confiscated his computer, papers, and files, and eventually arrested and charged him with being complicit in the monster's killings himself. This brings us up to this week in true crime history, as Spezi was arrested on this day in 2006. Mario spent 23 horrific days in prison before being released and absolved of all charges, the courts ruling that he had been jailed illegally and without supporting evidence. After his death in 2016, Douglas Preston said in Mario Spezi's memorial that long after his arrest and release, the prosecutor and the chief inspector of police in the monster investigation continued to file criminal charges against him. The Italian courts repeatedly dismissed those charges, only to have the prosecutor and police file new and slightly revised charges. Preston wrote, quote, "This judicial vendetta went on for almost a decade and caused Mario and his family serious economic distress. His doctors say this unrelenting harassment contributed greatly to his ill health, and I have no doubt hastened his death. Not a single one of those charges ever led to a conviction," end quote.
An Italian magazine called Tempi published an article in their May 2018 issue suggesting that the Monster of Florence and America's Zodiac Killer are the same person, Giuseppe Joe Bevilacqua, a New Jersey native who moved to Tuscany in the 1970s. The anonymous author of the article claims that Bevilacqua explained the code of the Zodiac Killer to him. In more than one puzzle sent by the Zodiac, the names Giuseppe or Joe, as well as the last name Bevilacqua, can be deciphered. Bevilacqua was the director of the U.S. Military Memorial Cemetery of Falciani and San Cassiano. So points that back up the idea, including the attorney Melvin Belli, is said to have received a phone call from the Zodiac on December 20th saying it was his birthday. Bevilacqua's birthday is December 20th. The first murder in San Francisco claimed by the Zodiac was also on December 20th in 1968. A graphologist studied the letters written by both the Zodiac Killer and the Monster of Florence, claiming that both included signs of the Zodiac in their letters, with the Monster of Florence seeming to put a particular focus on the phases of the moon. The envelopes the letters were mailed in were also allegedly folded in the same way in both cases.
Today, the case of the Monster of Florence is either closed or has gone cold, depending on who you ask. There's no active investigation at the moment, but there's still a great deal of public interest. In 2013, the first national convention on the Monster of Florence was held in Italy. Folks involved in the case, including investigators and witnesses, came together to discuss whether anyone convicted in the case had truly been involved and whether there was any useful information circulating that had previously been overlooked. The Monster of Florence murders, like the Zodiac killings, have stopped with no activity in the past 36 years. Whether this is because the perpetrator has been caught and imprisoned, because he has passed away, or for some other reason, remains to be seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is such a wild one. I don't know what to think about whether or not it's been closed. Like sometimes I think with these cases, they're so wild that even if there is kind of like a resolution that's believable, it's like your brain wants to think it's got to be something else.
Yeah.
It can't be that easy. Like it's got to be someone else.
It's
like
just
whatever,
so convoluted. It's like, how could this even be one person? And if it is one person, how could it not be some kind of mastermind? Like, how could it be someone that's semi-literate, as they're saying, or someone that's, having any sort of mental sort of disabilities? That doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense.
Yeah, doesn't make sense.
But like, there's so many details that like, it's even hard to put together an episode about this. And I can only imagine how it was writing a book about this. It's just like, there's things that I just couldn't find a place for in the story that are still really fascinating, but I'm like, what does it tie into, if anything? Like, there was one really weird guy who, while they were looking at doctors and stuff, this guy came under suspicion because he was known as a doctor, because he introduced himself as a doctor to everyone he knew. Mm-hmm. He had these fake business cards printed up that said he was a doctor at a school that didn't exist. And then he walked around carrying a medical bag full of scalpels. He, like Anatoly Moskvin, enjoyed like cemetery walks, and he was said to even have taken sleeping pills when he would have sex with his wife, because he wanted to prevent himself from getting up in the middle of the act and going to finish himself off in the cemetery instead, because he was more interested in the tombstones. So like, that was a really creepy dude, but apparently completely unaffiliated, had like nothing to do with this. They tracked him for a bit, and then they were like, I guess he's not doing anything, he's just a weirdo. And then there's like one guy who looked exactly like the initial sketch. So much so that when they finally caught up to him, he knew exactly what they were there for. And he was like, yeah, I know. I almost came in myself, because I know I look exactly like this guy. It's ruined my life ever since this sketch came out, because every person I know is harassing me about it. He also was not affiliated at all. So like, there's so many trees that they started to bark up that looked like they might have held some weight, but no, in the end, it's nothing. Right. And it's just very, very confusing. But I think like the most important point is just that it seems to be a whole lot of shoddy police work, a whole lot of records being destroyed, a whole lot of just like fabricating evidence and shit, and arresting people under false pretenses and stuff like that. So it's like, I think that makes the whole thing a lot more complicated and nearly impossible to solve. Like, they've probably ruined it for themselves. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it kind of makes me think of the like the Black Dahlia, how, like for a long time, like the media had said that it must have been done by a doctor, and of course, a lot of people believe that doctor was George Hodel, which does seem like a pretty plausible theory. Right. But I did listen to the Murder Squad episode about that case for our TikTok that we did a little while ago. Mm-hmm. And one thing that Paul Holes, an investigator, like pointed out is that like for the time, maybe they thought that it could have been done by a doctor, because like, they dissected her in the middle. But then he's like, these were not precise cuts. And I think like they're like a police investigation definition of precision with cuts is not the same as like a doctor going in and evaluating that. And he said like anybody would have like, you have to bisect somebody in the middle because there's bones at the hip and then there's bones at your ribs. Like you only have the middle to cut into easily.
Exactly.
So that was really an interesting thing he had pointed out. It's like how precise were these cuts really would be something I would be interested in from like a modern day perspective.
For sure.
You know, I certainly have a lot of questions based on 80s police work.
Well, yeah. And police work aside, like there's also the factor of just like local gossip as well as the media.
Sure.
Like there's all types of people speculating what kind of person could have done this, whether it's a doctor, butcher, whatever. And that came to be an issue with the Monster of Florence case a lot because basically when you look at different articles, there will be articles about the same murder where one article will say, oh, he cut with precision and like everything was clean and perfect. And then another article about the exact same murder would be like, he hacked in there with like abandon. And you're like, what was it? Like what really happened? Yeah. So who knows? I mean, I think a lot of this is like, especially when it becomes hard to catch the killer and investigators are kind of at a loss, it like spins itself into its own myth where you're just like, oh, yes, absolutely. It involves all of these factors that just really aren't anything. But I can see how that can get carried away.
Yeah, absolutely. But great job with the research and all of this slaughtering of the Italian language has really given me a craving for some gnocchi, which I'm going to make after this.
I had the best gnocchi the other day. My friend like fried it up with some Brussels sprouts and like butter and lemon. Super amazing.
Oh, that sounds incredible. I'm just going to make mine with canned red sauce.
Oh, well, whatever.
and some Beyond Meat sausages because they're amazing.
Yeah, I haven't had the Beyond Meat sausages, but I've been trying a lot of vegetarian sausages that I don't know how it is comparatively for like what's available there or here, but like we found this this brand here called Gusta, where they have like 10 different flavors. They're so good. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, they're great. It's a Montreal-based company, right?
Oh, maybe. I don't even know.
I think so. I think so. They're good. The Beyond Meat is probably like the closest to like tasting like a real bratwurst kind of sausage sort of thing, which isn't necessarily my goal because it's been so long since I've had meat. I don't really care. But admittedly, like all the sage and spices and these and the texture just really does it for me.
Amazing.
Like they're the best I've ever had. They're really incredible.
Very cool. So what have you been watching this week?
I've had a very low bandwidth in the past week between all of my dental work and like another health crisis I'm dealing with that I'm trying to kind of get a grasp on before I leave Budapest because things are very affordable and quite English speaking here. So I'm trying to like get into doctors and try not to have a complete meltdown about like all these like issues going on. But so I've only had the bandwidth to watch like Summer House, which is like the lowest of low Bravo trash. Like it's just
This is a reality show?
Good. It's a reality TV show, and it's like these New Yorkers that get a summer house together in the Hamptons every year. And like when it starts off like 6 years ago, they're all in their like 20s and maybe a couple like early 30-year-olds. And they're just trying to like bang each other and like, you know, like chasing each other around. Like it's very watchable and low stakes. Like, it's been like the perfect kind of like distraction for me right now. But I did listen to one podcast that is true crime related, Twin Flames. Have you listened to this yet?
No.
Okay, it's a cult, so you're going to love it.
All right.
And yeah, I don't want to give too much away. So basically, the concept of the cult was started by this couple that like met and are just like, oh, you're my soulmate, my twin flame, you complete me sort of thing. And like everybody should have their soulmate because your life can't be complete unless you are a couple and a straight couple and like all these like terrible ideas. So from that, like they manipulate all of these people that are like heartbroken or have somebody that does not return their love for that person into joining this cult where your objective is to find your twin flame at any cost. at any cost. Like once you find them, like you must make them love you, and your love is eternal. Like you've known them from past lives. Like you've been in love with each other for thousands of years. So you must be reunited. And if they're rejecting you, that just means you have to try harder.
Wow.
What could go wrong?
Only everything, it sounds like.
Yeah, it gets real messed up and real messy, and how these people are not in jail for some of like the terrible things that they end up doing is just beyond me. Definitely go check that out because you will love it. And Angelina, and anybody that has been listening, let's chat. I have a lot of thoughts.
I'm definitely going to look into that. I'm always hungry for more cult stuff, so hey.
Yeah, it's really good. It's only 6 episodes. You'll listen to it in like 2 days. You're going to love it.
Sweet.
How about you? What have you been watching?
I mean, I've had my hands full with this one, so I've just been devouring anything and everything Monster of Florence, which, I mean, nice. The Giallo movie was a fun departure because it was not so sort of documentary style or so rooted in reality. It was a little bit more of a sort of a fun movie.
That sounds great.
Yeah, but it is weird though. Like, I mean, the goriest part is like the very last second of the movie, which is kind of strange, but it's cool. I liked listening to podcasts about that too, reading the book, but I really had very little time for anything else aside from continuing some of the other shows that we've already talked about. So
your list of sources really impressed and inspired me this week. Like,
I don't know
I feel like you are a world-renowned expert on this case now.
Like,
I'm very impressed.
I literally went down so far down the rabbit hole. It's like my rabbit holes are not just rabbit holes. They're more like ant colonies, sort of. Like when you pour in the metal to form an ant colony, and it has all these different sort of veins spiking off of the main one. It's like I went down so many strange and twisted paths that Incredible. I don't even know what's going on anymore. But I recommend all those things. It was really fun. So,
yeah, sounds great. And I just wanted to thank Ariane, who sent us kitty pictures this week. We had mentioned on our Patreon newsletter that I was kind of having a rough week with all my mouth stuff, which y'all already know. And you sent the cutest kitty pictures and a little kitty toy you had made your cat.
A Mothman. That was so cute.
The Mothman. Yeah. It was so good.
Yeah. And the cat was Vladimir.
Yeah, that's right. The cat's Vladimir. And oh my gosh, I'm actually pulling up right now to look at your cat again because it's making me so happy. Oh my gosh, he's so handsome.
Yeah.
And he's
so
like
cute.
doing this great vampire face in several photos. He's just
he has the perfect
cutest
name.
Little kitty with the best Mothman toy. So thank you very much. That really cheered me up. We always welcome cat and dog or bunny or snake or lizard or any animal you have. I love them all. We always welcome pet pics because it does make us so happy.
100%. Well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week. If I have misjudged your capacity for creepy murder stories, you can find plenty of others on murdermurder.news, where we post the latest in true crime news every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at Murder Murder News, your one-stop shop for all the best in murdery memes, on Twitter at Murder News, where you might find your next favorite podcast on one of our Follow Friday tweets. It's the only way that we can be active for all of our wonderful podcast friends. So we love to shout you out when we post once a week. You can find us on TikTok at Murder Murder News, where this week we mark the 25th anniversary of the murder of Laura Smither, often associated with the Texas killing fields, which we explored in further detail on our podcast back in October. So go check that out if you haven't heard that one. You can also find us on Facebook just by searching for Murder Murder News.
And while you're on Facebook searching for Murder Murder News, you'll also see our little group pop up. You'll want to make sure you're a member if you enjoy things like live virtual events and meeting new spooky friends for book club. We're currently reading Underground, The Tokyo Gas Attack and the Japanese Psyche by Haruki Murakami. We will meet to discuss the book on Zoom on Sunday, April 23rd, which means you still have a couple of weeks to get reading.
Make your random act of kindness this week by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Reviews help new fans find the show and let us know what you like so we can keep delivering all the best in true crime content. Have a great week.
Bye, friends.
Bye.